Hey, what's up guys? It's Rico here, back with another one, but this time it's a webinar one. We hosted a webinar a couple months ago on the 4 steps to find Chinese manufacturer, the same steps that my company uses, Retrospective in Asia, that we've developed over the last 10 years. And it was so popular, we decided to do another one. So this is gonna be December 12th, December 13th. So if you're in East Coast time, that'll be December 12th, 8 p.m. and then 8 a.m. the next day, December 13th. If you're in Southeast Asia and most of Europe, it's mostly going to be December 13th. So there'll be one webinar in the morning on December 13th and another one evening on December 13th. So the link is in the description below to show you all the time zones. And like I said, this is on the 4 steps that we use to find Chinese manufacturers. The difference between this webinar and the last one is that we had so much Q&A on the last one. We had 25 minutes on the last one at the end that told me that people wanted a little bit more crowd interaction. So in this webinar, we're going to be doing, at the end of each section of the presentation, we are going to be having a live Q&A in between before I move on to the next section. So it's almost going to be like the presentation itself will be there, the value, but then there's also going to be sort of a live consultation that you get from me, personalized consultation for free. So definitely want to see you guys there. Like I said, it's December 12th, December 13th. Link is in the description below. We're also going to have a special Christmas bonus for people that attend the webinar. What's up YouTube? It's Rico here, CEO of SourceFind Asia, co-host of the Media Channel podcast and the host of the SourceFind Asia YouTube channel. Back with another one. A while ago, I did a video called The Basics of Performing Quality Control Inspections. I think I mentioned in that video I was going to do a deep dive, and today is the day when I do a deep dive. So we're going to be focusing on the process of doing a quality control inspection, AQL level 2 inspection, using PVC toys as a case study. So just a quick refresher. So the AQL level 2 or AQL level quality control standards is a global standard that was developed in World War II. I talked about it more in depth in the basics of how to perform quality control inspections. I'll put a link in the description below. But so that is the standard that you're usually going to use when you're performing inspections in China. For example, with our products, we actually have them on display here, ProdigyGame.com/toys. This was actually our first client, and we produced PVC figurines together. So this goes way back to 2015. In fact, the first product is this guy, Big Hex. This is actually a 3D printed model. So this is before we actually produced off of the mold. And you can see the final version there, and then we expanded the toy line afterwards. So as I've mentioned in previous videos, when you're doing quality control inspections, you're going to break it down, especially when it's an original design. There's going to be 3 steps to it. You're going to have a 3D printed prototype, which is not going to be painted, and then you're going to have a hand-painted version of that. And then once the mold is produced, you're going to do a sort of during production inspection, and then you have the final random inspection at the end of the production. So breaking down the during production inspection, the FRI final random inspection, those are quite similar, except the difference is you want to inspect the product when you have 5% produced, 10% produced, 40% produced, so you can catch certain things very early. And then for the final random inspection, that's at the end of the production when everything is fully packaged, everything is completed, and you're inspecting the products that are ready to be shipped out. So obviously the initial sample, that's going to be very easy, right? You have a 3D printed model, you're confirming that it looks the way you want it to look. And once they hand paint that, you confirm that it has the colors and the right paint style that you want. But it's not going to be an accurate reflection of how the product will look after mass production. So that's why you want to do a during production inspection. Specifically with something like toys, there are very, very strict rules when you're selling a product like toys to children, obviously, right? The safety concerns. And I'm sure you guys have heard of issues in the past where products that were given to kids had toxic chemicals. So when you do the during production inspection, you want to take out, typically, depending on the product, you're going to take out, let's say, 5 toys. These would be fully painted, fully produced, like off of the production line. You're sending them to a testing facility. The most famous one is called SGS. They're also one of the most expensive ones, but that is like the, I guess, gold standard globally. And they usually request like 5 of the toys, and then they'll request a portion of the paint, and then they'll request a portion of the raw materials, so the PVC that is used in the product. And then they do a test for toxic chemicals and strength test and safety tests and all that stuff. So what we do as well during production inspection, we also do kind of similar testing, except we don't test for the toxic chemicals because we don't have the equipment for that. So I'm going to break down the DPI process. So for the during production inspection, the first thing you want to do is you want to have clearly defined what your critical, major, and minor defects are. Again, if you're familiar with the AQL level 2 process, you should have that defined before you even start the mass production. We separated the inspection into 2 different inspections. So you take, let's say, a sampling of 80 toys, right? And you're going to do a general aesthetic inspection, and then you're also going to do a physical stress test inspection. So the aesthetics thing is pretty straightforward. If I take out one of these toys, so the general aesthetics, we're talking about paint defects, little edges of the product to see if they've been injection molded properly. You want to see that it's been glued together properly as well. So that's a general aesthetic thing. So you just want to go through each one. You're probably going to have a perfect sample, like a golden sample, and then you're going to take that golden sample and just look at each one and say, okay, does this match as close as possible to the golden sample? You should have major, minor, critical defects defined. So yes, it's not going to be 100% the same every single time, right? But let's say a critical defect is, this is orange, the hair here is supposed to be orange, and then you find out that there's like a black streak going down. That's an obvious critical defect, right? So that's the general aesthetic. You're not going to be inspecting packaging at this stage, because again, this is a during production inspection, so the packaging is probably not even completed yet. Then you want to do the stress test. So for the stress test, what we did, and there's going to be obviously a video playing over me right now, but what we did is we do a pull test and a drop test. So the pull test, there are general standards for North America and Canada for pull tests, and there are general standards for Europe. You're basically trying to pull the product from one of the parts that is glued together. So you're going to pull it and apply a certain amount of force to it and see how long it withstands that force. So for these products, I don't remember the specific amount, but it was something to the degree of like 80 pounds of force, and you're pulling them for about 5 to 10 seconds at a time and seeing whether it completely comes apart. So that's basically testing the strength of, if a kid is going to pull the toy apart, is it going to stay together? And if it passes that, then that passes the test. It can break, but it has to at least withstand a certain amount of time. So it'll be like 5 to 10 seconds. So you can see we try to pull from multiple angles and from different sections of the product that is glued together. Now with us, because we were making a very high-end figurine, we had our own sort of defect stipulation. So we were going above and beyond the standard rate. Like if the standard rate was 40 pounds of force, we were applying 90, and I remember having conversations with the factory at the time, and they're just like, nobody's ever going to like apply that amount of force, but we were trying to create a product that would last a very long time. So that's step one. Then you're doing the drop test. So the drop test is again very standard, depending on the age of the kids that are going to be playing with the toy and the size of the toy. There's going to be a certain height. So I remember with ours it was about 1 meter, but again we were going above and beyond. So we would go like 1.5 or 2 meters, and then you drop it at multiple angles. So you drop the toy on its head, you drop it at its base, you drop it on its side, and you try to drop it about 3 to 5 times on each angle and see if it breaks, or see if the toy starts to come apart or chip and things like that. So again, you want to have clearly defined major, minor, and critical defects. So if it drops, let's say you drop it 4 or 5 different angles, 10 times, and then at some stage, one of the heads popped off. Is that okay? Is that acceptable because it's been dropped so many times? Does it have to pass that complete standard? If it starts to come apart, is that acceptable? Is that critical? Is that minor or major? So you have to define those. Again, there are industry standards, but you also have to define your own level of quality that you want from the product. One question you guys might be asking right now is, how do I know how many products to inspect? So again, going back to the AQL tables, if you look at the AQL tables, you will know. So let's say you order 5,000 toys, 10% of the production is done, so that's 500. You will know based off of the AQL level standards that if you have 500 toys that are ready to be inspected, how many of those toys am I selecting as a base for my test plan. So now moving on to the final random inspection. As I mentioned before, the final random inspection is going to be quite similar to the during production inspection. The difference is that you're now inspecting for the final finished product, right? So you're looking at the product not only fully assembled and painted, but you're also looking at it fully packaged, right? So it should be fully packaged in the box, and then also inside what's called the master carton. So the master carton is the carton that holds, so let's say you have, in each carton you might have 50 toys. So you put 50 toys in a big box, and that's the box that is used to ship to whatever. So it's gonna have, the location it's being shipped to, it's gonna have a description of the product, the size and all that stuff. And then the master carton is how you actually even define your shipping cost. With our final random inspections, we kind of split them into 5 parts, actually 4 parts rather. So we had one, we're checking the production status. Are the toys actually completed? So we sometimes do final random inspections when there's like, let's say 90% completed or something like that, because we still know that's going to be a good enough sample size to approve the shipment. But ideally you want to go there when 100% of the products have been finished, and then maybe 70%, 80% have actually been packaged into the master carton. So then you still have a sample size that you can use for stress tests and things like that. And then the second part of our inspections was the export packaging. So as I mentioned before, seeing how the product has been fully packaged, because we even had requirements in terms of how which direction the toy should be facing, right? So if this toy was facing this way or facing inward, that's a fail. So you have to have your own stipulations and give the factory very clear instructions, SOPs prior to the production starting on that. And like I said, you want to stress test the master cartons. The third part would be the inner packaging and labeling. With these toys, we actually had sort of code for the toys, and each toy has its unique code, so the kids would be able to unlock the character in the game. So this is some of the stuff that you want. The factory was responsible for labeling each one of those, and you want to make sure that it's been done correctly. And then the fourth part was the product inspection. So we're doing a general aesthetic inspection, and then we're also doing a physical stress test. And then the fifth part of the inspection was to see whether the sum of the defects has passed the AQL level standards that we've set up. And then from there you have to have the next course of action. Are we holding the shipment? Are we approving the shipment? Are we asking the factory to remake the products? Like, what is the next course of action? So I'm not gonna go point by point in terms of how each part of the inspection is done, because this would end up being a 2-hour video. But we should have a screenshot of our reports so you can kind of have a better look at each individual step of the inspection process. But starting off with the packaging, so the export packaging, how the master cartons are put together in the inner packaging, you want to check the export information is correct. So there's something called the shipping mark. This is something that the factories are going to request from you probably 2 to 3 weeks before the end of the production. Is what is your shipping mark? There is no real standard, like unless you're shipping to a warehouse like an Amazon warehouse, they will have specific standards in terms of how they want the master cartons and the actual packaging to be labeled. But essentially this is your information. Like, you just want to put your company name, what the product is, maybe the size of the actual carton, and maybe the weight of it, and then where is it shipping to. So like made in China and going to California, something like that. So again, that's up to you really. You could be as detailed or it can be as simple as you want it to be. unless you are working with a specific warehouse that has specific requirements for the carton. The other thing that you're going to do is there's going to be what we like to call like a drop test for the master carton. And this is based off of the size of the carton. It's also based off the weight. So the reason why you do this is because during the course of shipping, whether it's an air shipment or a sea shipment, that carton is going to be dropped. It's going to happen. Like it's either going to be dropped or it's going to be kicked or whatever is going to happen during the shipping process. You want to make sure that your carton is thick enough and strong enough to withstand that damage and not actually damage the product that's inside. So with ours, just looking at the report, ours was between 10 to 15 kgs. So we would drop it from about 61 centimeters. And you only have to do this once. You do it once, maybe with 2 or 3 different boxes. Then you open it up and look at the packaging and see if the packaging is still intact. You just want to check for smells. You want to check that the products have been, like the right products are packaged within the cartons, that they're also, the right amount has been packaged within the cartons. And then some general information, you want to check that the weight matches what you think it's supposed to weigh, because if it's heavier, that means that you're probably going to have to pay a larger shipping price. If it's lighter, that means that there might be some products missing. So you want to double check that the estimated weight is roughly what you're expecting it to be. And then the other part is after you've done the master cartons, right? You want to actually open up some individual packaging to see that, again, the product has been packaged correctly, that it doesn't smell, because if the product wasn't dried enough before you put it into the box, there's going to be that like chemical smell from the paint. And that means that the factory just didn't dry them effectively. You also want to make sure that there hasn't been any like paint that's been chipped off into the inside of the packaging and little things like that. So again, use the same process of measuring the size and the weight of the master cartons. You want to go through that same process with the toys, the toy packaging. You want to make sure that the size is correct, the weight is correct, it's what you're expecting it to be, and just for any other general defects from an aesthetic point of view. So as I mentioned before, during production inspection, when you do that, you do the general aesthetic inspection, you do the physical inspection of the actual toy. You're going to do the same thing in the FRI, except you're just going to have a larger sample size. So again, if your order is 5,000 units, then you're going to be taking a sample size based off of the AQL level 1, 2, or 3, but typically 2. Based off of that chart, how many samples are you going to take as a general inspection? And then you're not going to do the same exact inspection on the same amount of toys. You're going to take, let's say, if the sample size is 100 units, you're going to take 40 for the stress tests, and then you're going to take 60 and then split them up into different things. So you might take 3 pieces and weigh them. You might take 3 pieces and measure the dimensions. You might take 60 or 80 pieces and do a general aesthetic inspection. So you don't have to inspect every single unit. It's also not realistic to do that. That would take days. So this is just sort of the standards that you want to follow. So again, you're going to do a drop test. You're going to do the pull test, as I mentioned before. What you should be looking at is the defect rate from the during production inspection, and then comparing that to the final random inspection. And you want to see an improvement, right? Because or you want it to be exactly the same if it passed the first time. Because if you found defects during production inspection, you're supposed to tell the factory to fix those defects, and then there should be an improvement in the final random inspection. So as I mentioned, for the pull test and stress test, some of the stuff that I did mention in the during production section is you can buy actual pull test machinery. So we had a pull test rig. It was automated, and you set the amount of force you want, and then you set up the toy in the rig, and then it would pull it from opposite ends. It would hold it for whatever set amount of time that you request. You can obviously buy your own equipment, or you can work with a company like mine, and then other QC companies. Sometimes the factories will have this equipment in-house. So if you don't have it and you want to send a company or you want to go there, you can use their equipment. I would not trust a factory to perform your final random inspection. Like, even if it's great if a factory does that on their own, but it's still your responsibility as a buyer to, one, get your products tested, get the certification done, to perform the inspections yourself, because you're still going to be liable. The factory is not going to care about the product as much as you do. So again, once you've done that, you want to compare the defects, see if the product passes your requirements and the general standards. If it doesn't, then you should already have some sort of agreement in place with the factory to say, if this doesn't pass the final random inspection, what is the course of action? Are we fining you? Are we reproducing the product? Are we replacing the product? Are we fixing the defects? Maybe the defects are very minor, so there could be like little paint things that need to be touched up. You don't want to be in a position where you do the final random inspection and then it's a failure and you don't have some sort of preset agreement in place with the factory. So yeah, of course we offer the service. There's other QC companies that do, but we have quite a bit of experience in this arena, and we also work with QC companies. If the product is something that we don't feel comfortable inspecting, then we do work with other companies as well. Another part of the final random inspection process is inspecting packaging. So a lot of people don't understand this, but packaging is basically a separate product. And if you're producing at a certain scale, you might want to have a separate packaging factory. So for example, with these toys, we were doing 40,000 toys in an order, and our packaging was quite specific in design. It becomes more cost effective and it's smarter to have a separate packaging factory. So that's what we had. Typically the packaging, your factory is going to tell you, like the factory that's producing the main product is going to tell you when they need the packaging by. But typically packaging doesn't take that long. Once you confirm a sample, it's really just them printing out, it's on whatever quality of paper that you're using. It's pretty much just them printing out and stamping the mold for the screen here. And then with us, we also have what's called a blister tray. So this is also a separate thing. It has its own mold, and this is just injection molded, and they cut each one of these pieces and then you inspect that it fits together. So when you do the final random inspection, you're inspecting one fully assembled packaging like this, but typically the actual packaging is not going to be put together. It's actually going to be like flat pieces of cardboard, and you just want to inspect aesthetically, has it been printed correctly? If you look at 5 or 10 of these and they've been printed correctly, you don't have to inspect the other 20,000 of them, because it's just a printer. And then you want to make sure that the product actually fits in the packaging the way you expect it to be. So the QC process is going to be similar. You're still going to be using an AQL level 2 inspection process, but there's actually less steps to the inspection when you're inspecting packaging, and therefore you can just take a larger sample size. If you want some additional information on our business process with Prodigy, I actually did a 3-hour podcast with Brian Parisian. It's in 3 parts. So it's obviously audio, made in China podcast. Check it out. So I hope this video was educational, and we'll check you guys next week. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe.